Hello everyone, welcome to our biology lesson. We are going to learn about gaseous exchange in animals. Your presenter is Mwende Josephine. The objectives of the lesson are, by the end of this lesson, the learner should be able to examine various types of respiratory structures in animals and relate them to their functions, state characteristics of respiratory surfaces, describe the mechanism of gaseous exchange in protozoa, insects, fish, frog, and mammals. May you please enjoy as we continue throughout the lesson. Welcome. In the introductory part, we'll first define what gaseous exchange is. Gaseous exchange refers to the process of gases moving between an organism and its environment. It involves transfer of gases across a respiratory surface. We have different respiratory structures in different animals. In the amoeba, the respiration occurs through a process called diffusion, and it is through the contractile vacuole. We find that here we have the contractile vacuole, we have the food vacuole, this one, and we have the nucleus. So exchange of gases takes place through the membrane, and we find that there is intake of oxygen and release of CO2. In fish, we find that the respiratory structure is the gills, and in the gills have different parts. We have the gill filaments, and we find that in the gills, oxygen is taken in through the water, which is taken in through the mouth of the fish, and the gill is located below the operculum. Operculum is what covers the gills. As we continue, we have the earthworm. In the earthworm, we have the spiracles, and the earthworm takes in oxygen and releases carbon dioxide, just as the other animals. We also have the frog. The frog, the nostril, we have the mouth cavity, we have the lungs, we have the skin. So we find that the frog respiration takes place through the skin and also through the lungs. So we find that exchange of gases can take place through the slimy skin, where oxygen is taken in and carbon dioxide is released to the environment. This is the structure of human respiratory system. We have the frontal sinus, nasal concha, we have the nose, larynx, trachea, bronchus, bronchiole, left lung. This is the left lung. The entire organ here is the left lung. This dome-shaped structure is the diaphragm. We have the right lung. We have the alveoli. The alveoli is located in the bronchioles. We have the pharynx, the nasal cavity, and the sphenoidal sinus. So this is the structure of the human respiratory system. As we continue with the lesson, we'll find how it functions and the behavior of different organs during inhalation, which is breathing in, and exhalation, which is breathing out. Our next point of discussion is characteristics of respiratory surfaces. The first point is that it must be moist. Why moist? The moist respiratory surface helps dissolve respiratory gases, aiding their movement across the surface. So we find that if the respiratory surface is not moist, the gases can't move efficiently. Another point is it must be permeable to allow exchange of gases. That is, it must be selectively permeable. Why? They may have mechanism of control which gases pass through, ensuring the exchange of specific gases while preventing others from entering. So it must be selectively permeable, because if it is not selectively permeable, it can allow even carbon dioxide in, of which that is not allowed. Oxygen is what should be allowed in to enhance proper functioning of the body organs of an animal. Another characteristic is that it must have a thin wall. Why thin? Thinness facilitates diffusion of gases. These surfaces are often thin. Why thin? They must be thin to allow shorter distance to be covered during the exchange of gases. Because when the distance to be covered is long, we find that the excrete, which is carbon dioxide, may mix with what is needed for proper functioning of the body organs, which is oxygen. So when it is thin, it allows shorter distance to be covered by the respiratory gases. Another characteristic is that there must be adequate supply of transport medium. That is, in other terms, it must be richly supplied with blood. Why richly supplied with blood? These surfaces are usually well supplied with blood vessels to transport gases to and fro the body tissues. We find that sometimes it is proper for the carbon dioxide and oxygen to be transported through the blood for proper functioning of the body organs. Another characteristic is that it must be large. That is, large surface area. The larger surface area allows for more contact between the respiratory surface and the environment, facilitating efficient gaseous exchange. We find that when the surface area is small, there is no efficient contact between the respiratory surface and the environment, hence gaseous exchange will be slow. Another point is that it must be highly vascularized. That is, must have several blood vessels which transport oxygen, because we find that the gases are dissolved in oxygen for efficient transportation. We have mechanism of this. Another subtopic we are going to discuss is mechanism of gaseous exchange in the tracheal system. We find that fresh oxygen enters the tracheals. When it enters, it diffuses in the tissues. A carbon dioxide will diffuse out of the tissues. We find that as oxygen diffuses into the tissues, carbon dioxide diffuses out of the tissues, and that is called inhalation. Here, during inhalation, we find that oxygen from the environment enters through the spiracles. The spiracles are the small openings of the insect's body and travels through the tracheal system. Find that the oxygen diffuses from the trachea are the larger tubes, then into the tracheals, which are finer, smaller tubes, where it reaches body tissues. Simultaneously, carbon dioxide produced by the cells diffuses out of the tracheals and travels back to the spiracles to be released into the environment. We also have muscular movements during inhalation. Some insects employ muscular movements in their bodies to aid in the movement of gases through the tracheal system. This movement can help enhance air circulation within the tracheals. After the process of inhalation, the thoracic spiracle valve then closes as abdominal spiracle opens. As this happens, the carbon dioxide gas is released through the spiracle opening from the abdomen of the insect and into the surrounding environment in a process called exhalation. So we find that during exhalation, the thoracic spiracle valve closes and the abdomen spiracle valve opens. And during inhalation, the thoracic spiracle valves opens, and the abdominal spiracle valve closes. We find that as gaseous exchange ends in the tracheal system, the tips of tracheals are thin, moist, and the moist membranes enclose the cells. This allows the efficient exchange of gases directly with the body self, enabling oxygen uptake and carbon dioxide release. So this is the structure of the tracheal system. This is an insect. We have trachea to wing, we have thoracic spiracles, abdominal spiracle, lateral longitudinal tracheal trunk, ventral longitudinal tracheal trunk, transverse commissus, and abdominal spiracle. So we find that abdominal spiracles, they opens during exhalation so that oxygen can be released out, and the thoracic spiracle closes so that carbon dioxide can be pushed out. So this is a video where we are going to understand more about gaseous exchange in an earthworm. Let's listen to it and note down the important notes.
In perithema, body surface is act as a respiratory surface. Exchange of gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place between blood capillaries of outer epidermis and surface film of moisture contributed by secreted mucus, excreted waste, and coelomic fluid. Hemoglobin dissolved in plasma of blood acts as a respiratory pigment, transporting O2 to the body tissue.
So that is the end of the movie. We find that in the video we are being shown how oxygen is taken in through the spiracles and oxygen being released out.
In perithema, body surface is act as a respiratory surface. Exchange of gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place between blood capillaries of outer epidermis and surface film of moisture contributed by secreted mucus, excreted waste, and coelomic fluid. Hemoglobin dissolved in plasma of blood act as a respiratory pigment, transporting O2 to the body tissue.
The other subtopic we are going to talk about is the adaptation of the tracheal system to its function. Spiracles have stiff hair to trap dust particles. These openings can open and close, allowing insects to regulate the flow of air into their tracheal system. Find that this helps minimize water loss in the dry environments and prevent entry of foreign particles. That is, dust are foreign particles that can be trapped easily by the spiracles. We also find that the spiracles are warm. They warm the air for efficient diffusion. Spiracles have muscles that control the opening and closing during inhalation. That is the thickening. Find that the spiracles are thick. The tracheal walls may have spiral thickening or invaginations, maintaining structural support while allowing flexibility for movement, especially during changes in body size or volume. The trachea have chiton or tinidium, keeping them open. That is the tracheal endings. The tracheals have fine endings that penetrate tissues or come very close to cells, allowing for a more direct and efficient exchange of gases between the respiratory system and the cells during requiring oxygen. Tracheae are hollow to allow gaseous exchange. Some insects like grasshoppers possess air sacs that can expand and contract, aiding in the movement of air through the tracheal system, enhancing gaseous exchange and gas exchange efficiently. Another adaptation is that they are numerous, thin, moist, and well ventilated. This is a video summarizing gaseous exchange in human beings and the behavior of the structures and their functions and how they function well during respiration. Let's watch it.
This animation illustrates the human respiratory system in an unprecedented way. Let's do this fantastic journey together. Not only oxygen, which is important for us, is part of the air we breathe. Water also enters our respiratory system, as well as other gases like krypton, or even radioactive radon. In addition, small and large particles are part of the air, which shouldn't enter our lower respiratory tract. For this reason, the upper airways provide certain protective mechanisms. Large dirt particles or insects are stopped in the nasal cavity by our nasal hair. Small particles are trapped by the nasal mucosa. Ciliated cells are located on the nasal mucosa. These cilia move in a wave-like manner. This allows the cilia to push the nasal mucus produced by the goblet cells towards the pharynx. Consequently, small particles that have been caught by the nasal mucus are swallowed. This process is called mucociliary clearance. Furthermore, the upper airways, such as the nasal and oral cavities, warm and moisten inspired air. During the act of swallowing, the epiglottis, which is connected to the tongue, ensures that no food or liquid can enter the lower respiratory tract. To do this, the epiglottis closes the larynx during swallowing, so that the bolus slides into the esophagus. The trachea, right below the larynx, is surrounded by incomplete rings of hyaline cartilage for reinforcement. Near the heart, the trachea branches into two main bronchi. The main bronchi lead to the left and right lungs. The left lung has only two lobes, upper and lower, whereas the right lung has three lobes. The centrally located heart pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. Oxygenated blood returns to the heart through the pulmonary veins and eventually to all organs. The main bronchi form the trunks for the bronchial tree. Like the branches of a tree, the tubular system of the lung starts here, into finer and finer branches. The right lung has 3 lobes with 10 lung segments. Each lung segment receives its own air and blood supply. At the ends of the bronchial tree are tiny air sacs called alveoli. It is estimated that humans have 300 to 400 million alveoli. Large Large branches with cartilage are called bronchi. Thin branches at the end of a bronchial tree are called bronchioles. Instead of cartilage, bronchioles are surrounded by elastic fibers and smooth muscle. The exchange of gases occurs with the help of the alveoli. Individual alveoli are found on the walls of the bronchioli respiratory. Several alveoli are grouped together at the end of a bronchioli respiratory to form an alveolar sac, which is supplied by one alveolar duct. Alveoli are approximately 50 micrometers in size. They enlarge considerably during inhalation. Alveoli are largely composed of thin cells called type 1 pneumocytes. These cells are extremely thin, allowing oxygen and carbon dioxide to diffuse. Air, with the required oxygen, enters the alveoli via the alveolar duct. This is where gas exchange begins. All alveoli are covered with a network of thin blood vessels. The oxygenated blood can thus be enriched with oxygen and at the same time release unneeded carbon dioxide into the alveoli. This is done with the help of red blood cells, the erythrocytes. Erythrocytes move through the blood vessels and take up the oxygen, shown here in blue. Iron, Fe, in these blood cells is responsible for binding the oxygen. An iron ion can bind to one oxygen molecule so that the oxygen can be transported. At the same time, the carbon dioxide in the bloodstream and emitted by red blood cells diffuses into the alveoli. This is made possible by diffusion. In the alveoli, we see a lot of oxygen, whereas in the blood vessels, there is a lot of carbon dioxide. This difference in concentration is eventually balanced by diffusion. This is how the differences in concentration are equalized. Let's now look at how air, and therefore oxygen, is transported into our lungs. Our body has various muscles that inflate and deflate the lungs. The muscles of the neck are responsible for fixing and raising the sternum and upper ribs, and certain muscles between the ribs raise and lower all the other ribs. However, the most important muscle of respiration is not found in the neck or chest area, but near the abdomen. The thoracic diaphragm, or simply diaphragm, is responsible for most of the work of breathing. First, let's take a closer look at chest breathing through the neck and rib muscles. Due to their arrangement and the contraction of the rib muscles, the ribs rotate outward. This causes an increase in volume, particularly in the lower regions, that is, the caudal ribs. The rib movement can be imagined similar to the handle of a bucket. The handle is shown here in red. Therefore, it is called bucket handle motion. The increase in chest volume occurs not only laterally, but also sagittally. The sternum rotates as well, as seen here. This is called pump handle motion, because the movement of the sternum can be thought of as the motion of a pump handle. Thus, one can easily visualize the increase and decrease in volume of the lungs. When the lungs inflate, the negative pressure is created in the lungs and we breathe in. When the lungs deflate, positive pressure is created and air is forced out of our lungs. We breathe out. Inhalation, exhalation, inhalation, exhalation. Here we can see the inhalation and exhalation process from below. As noted earlier, in addition to chest breathing, we can use diaphragmatic breathing. It can be performed separately or in cooperation with chest breathing. Diaphragmatic breathing is the natural way of breathing at rest. During diaphragmatic breathing, the diaphragm rises and lowers. When it rises, we exhale. When it lowers, we breathe in. In order for the lungs to inflate and deflate, the body has a pleura. The pleura serves as a lube outside of the lungs to allow for up and down motions against the chest wall. For this reason, the inner pleura covers the lungs. The outer pleura lines the rib cage and diaphragm. This allows the inner pleura to shift against the outer pleura. Between these two layers is the pleural cavity, shown here in yellow. This animation illustrates
The next slide summarizes what we've learned today, and that is the summary of respiration, behavior of the lungs as a structure of breathing.
Hey viewers, welcome to Scientific Biology. In this video, we will study about the human respiratory system. Human respiratory system is one of the most vital organ system of the body that support pulmonary ventilation, external and internal respiration, olfaction and phonation. We breathe about 16,000 to 24,000 times a day with exchange of about 11,000 liters of air with the atmosphere. In this process, the oxygen of the atmospheric air is delivered to the human body, which is then utilized by the tissue, and the carbon dioxide, which is produced by the human body, is exported to the lungs. If you enjoy my video, be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to make sure you can get notified when I upload a new video. In this video, we will first talk about the brief anatomy and physiology of the respiratory system. Then we will discuss how the gaseous transportation occurs. And later we will talk about how the respiratory regulation occurs in the human body. So first, coming to the anatomy and physiology of the respiratory system. The human respiratory system has two parts, the upper respiratory system and the lower respiratory system. The upper respiratory system consists nasal cavity, pharynx and larynx. Air entering the nasal cavity flows through the passage created by the superior, middle and inferior nasal conchae. Frontal, maxilla, nasal, ethmoid and vomer are the 5 bones of the nasal cavity that form a framework that support the nose. The pharynx is a muscular membranous tube that functions as a part of alimentary canal and as an airway in the upper respiratory system. Pharynx consists of 3 regions, and they are nasopharynx, oropharynx and laryngopharynx. The larynx is an organ of complex structure that serves as a dual function, as an air canal to the lung and as the organ of phonation. The skeletal framework of the larynx consists of cartilages connected by the membranes. The lower respiratory system consists trachea, bronchi, bronchioles and lungs. The trachea extends from the larynx to the upper border of the T5 vertebra, where it branches to form bronchi. The trachea is supported by a series of C-shaped cartilaginous rings that allow the trachea to change shape to accommodate masses of the food passes through the esophagus. The bronchi are the air passage into the lung that begins at the end of the trachea. There are 2 bronchi, one for each lung. The bronchi divide and redivide to form a bronchioles. There are 2 lungs in the human body, which are located inside the thoracic cage. The right lung is bigger than the left. The right lung has 3 lobes and the left has 2. There are hundreds of millions of alveoli exist inside each lung. These alveoli are the air sacs surrounded by the network of blood vessels that provide space for gaseous exchange. Now let's see how the gaseous transportation takes place in our body. During normal inhalation, air containing oxygen passes through the nose and mouth to the lungs. During normal exhalation, air containing carbon dioxide and other waste passes out the same path. This process of moving air in and out of the lung is called pulmonary ventilation or breathing. During normal inhalation, the diaphragm and the external costal muscles contract and a rib cage elevate. As a result, air rushes in. But during the normal exhalation, the muscle relax, so air is expelled out. Inside the lungs, oxygen from the air is exchanged for the waste carbon dioxide from the bloodstream. This process takes place in alveoli. Oxygen from inhaled air diffuses from the alveoli into the pulmonary capillaries, and the carbon dioxide from oxygen-depleted blood diffuses from the capillaries into the alveoli. Now, the bloodstream delivers oxygen to cells and removes the carbon dioxide through the process of internal respiration. In the lungs, oxygen is absorbed into the blood by RBC containing hemoglobin. Oxygen binds to this molecule. The oxygenated blood then moves through the vasculature. Within the body tissue, the RBC release oxygen, which then diffuse through the capillary wall into the tissue. Meanwhile, the waste carbon dioxide diffuses into the bloodstream, where it is carried inside the RBC and plasma. Now, the deoxygenated blood travels through vasculature and back to the lungs, where carbon dioxide is expelled out from the body. Now let's see how breathing is regulated by our brain. Respiration is an involuntary function. Nerve impulse is transmitted by the pons and the medulla oblongata to the respiratory center. The rate of normal breathing is 12 to 15 breaths per minute. The body adjusts the rate and depth of the normal breathing in response to metabolic needs. When the body uses more oxygen, sensor in the blood called chemoreceptor sends the signals to the brain. So the rate of breathing increases. Action including talking, sneezing and coughing can also alter breathing pattern for the short period of time.
In summary, gaseous exchange in protozoa. The mechanism: protozoa are single-celled organisms that perform gaseous exchange through simple diffusion across their cell membrane. The surface area for gaseous exchange occurs across the entire surface of the cell membrane due to their microscopic size. Moisture being aquatic organisms, they live in water, which helps maintain the necessary moisture for gaseous exchange. Find that protozoa have limited respiratory structure. Protozoa lack specialized respiratory organs and rely on their surface area for gaseous exchange. Another summary is for fish. We find that the mechanism for gaseous exchange in fish is that they utilize gills for gas exchange. Water containing dissolved oxygen passes through the gill filaments, where oxygen diffuses into the blood and carbon dioxide diffuses out into the water. We find that gaseous exchange in fish occurs through a countercurrent flow, whereby blood flow in the gills and water flow over the gill surface move in opposite direction, optimizing oxygen uptake. Highly vascularized gills. The gills are richly supplied with blood vessels, enhancing gas exchange efficiency. Moist membranes. Gills are kept moist, facilitating the diffusion of gases. Another summary is on insects. We've had a summary on protozoa, fish. We also have now insects. Insects, their mechanism of gaseous exchange is that they use a system of trachea and tracheals for gaseous exchange. Air enters through the spiracles and travels through a network of tubes directly to the cells. Tracheals penetrate tissues or come very close to cells, allowing direct gas exchange between the respiratory system and body cells. Adaptations. The spiracles can open and close, and some insects have their air sacs or use muscular movement to aid in air circulation through the tracheal system. The efficiency. Despite lacking lungs or a circulatory system for respiration, insects' tracheal system efficiently delivers oxygen through the tissues. So, as we end this lesson, the student should take note of the following questions. Number 1, Describe the adaptations of the respiratory surfaces to their functions. Number 2, adaptations of the tracheal system. Number 3, summarize gaseous exchange in protozoa, fish, and in insects. Thank you for watching the video. Let's connect on the next class. Your presenter was Josephine Mwende.